Okay.
I got it. I got it.
All
Oh,
right.
okay. So, Mark, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. I'm Connie Burnham with the University of Missouri Extension Program, and Mark is one of the people that I listen to a lot because he's in St. Louis, and he was a great go-to for this subject. So, Mark, if you want to give him a little bit of background on what you do and that sort of thing, and where you come from and where you are, and then you can start with your presentation.
All right. Thank you, Connie.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I've been with the National Weather Service now for golly, 34 years now. Wow. Uh, Prior to that, I was a TV meteorologist bouncing around different small to medium markets around the country for about 10 years. So I've been at this weather thing for a while. Um, but in the Weather Service, I started out at WSO Huntsville, Alabama, moved on to Weather Service Training Center in Kansas City in the mid 90s. And then I moved on to the Southeast River Forecast Center in 97. And that was the beginning of my foray into hydrology. From It was there in Peachtree City, Georgia for about 10 years. And after that, I moved on to my old stomping grounds. I'm originally from South St. Louis County, so I came back home, so to speak, in 2007, and I've been here ever since. Um, so this is the spring flood outlook and water resources outlook for the nation, and our bottom line up front. I should have taken out part of that, but anyway, the East Coast, we're looking at a near normal flood risk for this next 90 days or so. The central part of the country, uh, near to below normal flood risk, especially in drought areas. And much of the middle part of the country has been in drought off and on, but mostly on for about the last uh, 2.5 years now. We're looking at a third year, consecutive year of significant drought across Missouri and Illinois, especially in Missouri. Uh, the Gulf Coast and the Southeast, we're looking at a near to above normal flood risk in the wake of El Nino, which did provide beneficial rainfall to those areas. The West Coast, near to above normal flood risk. There's been a fair amount of rain the last month or two across California and and that part of the country, and on up into the Northwest. And finally, the Rockies near to above normal on flood risk. Factors that we look for spring flooding: recent precipitation in major river basins. That's a big one. Um, that helps sets the stage in several respects. Snowpack in major river basins. That's big in some areas, not so big in others. Of course, if you're down in Georgia or south or east part of the country, um, snowpack isn't a real big deal because they typically don't get that much. So they don't expect it. When they get it, it's, you know, it usually melts fairly quickly and it's not a significant factor. However, in the middle part of the country, where I'm at, the Mississippi River and to some extent the Missouri River both depend a fair amount on snowpack as a source of replenishment for the river during the spring. And that's why we see most of our flooding in the spring. And it's part of the reason we have a spring flood outlook anyway, is because of that seasonal lean towards the spring months for flooding around here. It doesn't always happen in the spring, of course. Our biggest flooding around here was the flood of '93, and that was the first day of August. But it was set up even that year. It was set up by a fairly wet and a fairly active spring of flooding in this neck of the woods. Another factor we look at is soil moisture, and that is also tied to recent precipitation, of course. But high soil moisture would tend to result in significant flooding if you have the rainfall to go with it. But if you have drought like we have across parts of the middle part of the country and other parts, as you'll see, um, and you have low soil moisture, very dry soils, your rivers can take a lot more rainfall in those cases. A good case in point, today we had uh, the results of yesterday's day-long rainfall across eastern Missouri and southwestern Illinois. Um, some areas had up to 3 inches of rain, and we had one flood warning in effect. It does not look like it's going to verify. The river checked up about 4 inches short of flood stage. So um, that's kind of common. If you'll put out warnings when you're in the middle of a drought because you've had a lot of rain, and it doesn't pan out because that basin can soak up a lot more water than our modeling would indicate. Even though our modeling does account for that dryness, sometimes it doesn't account for it completely. And current flow in area rivers. What your starting point is. If you're starting off high, close to flood stage, of course, it won't take a lot to get you up into flood stage. But that flow is low, like it is, again, around the middle of the country. Your river can handle a lot of water before it gets out of bank and starts affecting roads, homes, and property. So we'll start off with precipitation. This is a look at the last 3 months, and it shows um, who's had a fair amount of rain and who hasn't. You can see the Gulf Coast area has had over 30 inches of rain in just the last few months. For some folks, that's as much as you get. I'm sorry, 20 inches of rain. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but still, from eastern Texas on up into the western Carolinas, you got a swath of over. I think that's 20, right? Yeah, a swath of more than 20 inches of rain in that area. That's a lot of water over just 3 months' time, and that's all because of El Nino. And if you look along the west coast, you'll see similar results into the Pacific Northwest, along the coast there, along the Washington and Oregon coast, and the Northern California coast, where all those areas have had over 30 inches of rain. Some areas have had over 50 inches of rainfall in just the last 3 months for the winter. So, and then you can also look at the flip side of that, who has not had significant rainfall. And you can see a good part of the plains, especially the northern plains and into the Rockies, have had less than 5 inches of precipitation. And some of that is normal, but you can see some pockets there that have had less than a half an inch down there across southeastern New Mexico and into the Big Bend area of Texas and into parts of Wyoming and the Dakotas and across Utah as well. So some of those areas don't get much precipitation anyway. They're typically dry, semi-arid. But let's take a look and see how this compares to those local normals. And it's really a mixed bag. The coastal areas, especially the mid-Atlantic and northeastern part of the um, country, well above normal on precipitation over the last 3 months, over the winter months. Um, and then as you get down into the southeast, that max kind of shifts into the mountains of Carolina and across north central Georgia. There are some areas along the Gulf Coast, especially down into the panhandle of Florida, that have not had all that much precipitation. They're below normal for this time of the year. And into the eastern part of North and South Carolina as well, some areas that were below normal. But by and large, the Gulf Coast and up along the eastern seaboard, mostly above normal on precipitation. As you go up into the middle and upper part of the Midwest, you do see a change there. We get back to below normal precipitation across much of Missouri, western and northern Iowa and into especially across parts of Wisconsin and Minnesota. And that combined with the fact that it was really quite warm this winter across the entire country, but especially across the middle of the country, um, has resulted in an abject lack of snowfall across that area. And you also see predominantly below normal across the Dakotas and into uh, parts of Wyoming and Montana as well. Uh, but then we switch over to above normal across a good part of eastern Colorado, and it's kind of a hit and miss thing across much of the Rockies. Some areas getting above normal, mostly above normal. The below normal areas aren't quite as large, and we also see above normal precipitation across northern Montana, and as you'll see, particularly along the west coast of California and Oregon, where those areas have been predominantly above normal. And that, plus what we see across the Gulf Coast and the southeast part of the country, all directly correlated with this year's relatively strong El Nino. El Nino, by the way, is coming to an end this year. It's very likely to shift to neutral conditions during the late spring and summer, and then it's likely to shift to a La Nina environment, which can mean different things for different parts of the country. Now, soil moisture percentiles are going to be very similar to what I just showed you um, on precipitation anomalies. However, this is going to be uh, more dependent on recent rainfall in the last few weeks as opposed to the past 3 months. And you can see the biggest deficits are found across the state of Missouri and southern Illinois and western Kentucky and Tennessee and southern Indiana. We also see big deficits across parts of northeastern Iowa, northern Wisconsin into the upper peninsula of Michigan, and northwest Minnesota across North Dakota. And there's also a deficit across a portion of northwestern Montana and a part of central Washington, and as well into southwest Texas and eastern New Mexico, where drought has been going on. Speaking of drought, take a look at the U.S. Drought Monitor. This was valid as of last Tuesday. The one that's valid for today usually comes, well, it does come out every time on Thursday. And so not available yet. So we'll look at what it was like a week ago. And you can see that drought definitely a player across the states of Missouri, Kansas, eastern Nebraska, all of the state of Iowa, virtually, and all the state of Minnesota, although there has been just abnormal dryness along the Minnesota-Dakota border for the most part, and the northern half, really the northern two-thirds of the state of Wisconsin. We also see drought across western Montana and southern Montana into northern Wyoming and across parts of south central Colorado and across most of the state of New Mexico. Some significant drought, especially into southern New Mexico there along the Texas border, especially and Mexican border. We also have parts of Arizona looking at drought. Where you don't see any indication at all, you can presume that those areas are completely drought-free, not even abnormal dryness to consider. After years of drought, California is in that situation for the most part. No indication of drought, just a little bit of abnormal dryness across that state and into parts of Nevada. But most of the eastern third of the country, for the most part, drought-free, with a couple of minor exceptions in eastern North Carolina and western New York State. All right, the 7-day stream flow. Where do our streams start? And this graphic comes to us from the USGS, and you can see that the eastern seaboard is starting from a fairly high point across the states of New Jersey and parts of Virginia, eastern Pennsylvania, And as you get up into New England, lots of streams, especially up in New England, well above normal for this time of the year. And these are 7-day averages too. These aren't instantaneous flows, but This is average stream flows over the past 7 days and how things rank. However, as you get into the Ohio Valley and the middle and upper Mississippi Valley and into the Great Lakes, we see a lot of orange and dark red colors indicating stream flows that are below the 25th percentile. And where you see bright reds across parts of eastern Iowa and into central Wisconsin, those are breaking daily lows for 7-day average stream flows for those areas and for those particular streams. You also see some of that across Kansas and southeastern Nebraska and across parts of south central and western Texas. But as you go further west into the Rockies, you see more of the blue shaded colors indicating an above normal flow for streams across the Rockies into central Colorado, northern Arizona, northwestern Wyoming, western Montana, northern Idaho, and along the western coast. So that would be your starting point. As you notice, a lot of this kind of goes hand in hand, right? Below normal precipitation, below normal stream flow, below normal soil moisture. But we use all of them to come up with our outlook. This one's important. The latest modeled snow water equivalent, what we affectionately call SWE. There's a little bit actually up into southern Minnesota, which is a little bit surprising, but they have just had a blizzard across the Great Plains and into the upper Midwest. And so they have had a fair amount of snow there around the Minneapolis area and across most of southern Minnesota and northwest Wisconsin, where they've had at least an inch or more, and in some areas better than 2 inches of snow water equivalent. What that means is if you melt the snow water down that's on the ground, this is what you would come up with in terms of water that's just waiting to melt. So it starts out as snow, of course. As it melts, what I'm showing you then is the results of the melting. You'll also notice some decent snow water equivalent across much of western Colorado, far western Wyoming, and into western Montana and eastern Idaho, across a good part of Utah, and a good part of the Sierra Nevadas of eastern California, and into western Oregon and western Washington. Some of these areas are above normal, some are near normal. For the most part, we're looking at snow water equivalents that are largely close to normal for this time of the year, with a few places being above, a few being below. So how do things stack up over the next week? This is forecast precipitation that comes to us from the Weather Prediction Center. And this is day one. From this morning through tomorrow morning, we are looking at a precipitation pattern, a cold front moving across the eastern third of the country, producing significant rainfall, but not excessive, across eastern Ohio and on up into the Great Lakes area, up to maybe 3/4 of an inch of rain expected in my old stomping grounds, just west of East Liverpool, Ohio, which is north of Steubenville. And the amounts kind of taper off a little bit across the southern part of Ohio, western West Virginia, and into the eastern parts of Kentucky and Tennessee, and into the western parts of Virginia and North Carolina. But then we see heavier precipitation as we get down into amounts across Georgia and Alabama, but nothing excessive until you get down into Florida. We're looking at the possibility of up to 1.5 inches or better into the panhandle of Florida on day one. Not much going on out into the western part of the country, a little scattered precipitation in the Rockies for day one. Day two, that precipitation into the southeast part of the country along that front really does pick up, and we're expecting as much as 3 inches of rain across parts of northern Florida into southeastern Georgia, and also a fair amount of rain up to 3 inches into just north of Wilmington, North Carolina. So we have that to look forward to. Most of the middle of the country expecting a dry day, except up into the upper peninsula of Michigan, where they could get some lake effect snow down into parts of northern Wisconsin and northeastern Minnesota, as that low pressure area wraps around up into Canada there. The other feature of note would be into the Pacific Northwest, where heavier precipitation, up to a couple of inches of rain, is expected along the coast of northwestern California and southwestern Washington, into northwestern parts of the state of Washington. Excuse me, I meant southwestern Oregon there, for that 3+ inch area. Most of the middle of the country having a dry day too. Day 3, and this is from Thursday, mostly for Thursday and into Thursday night, Friday morning. Still some heavy precipitation along the East Coast, especially into the Outer Banks of North Carolina, near where the Wright brothers were trying to figure out how to take flight over a century ago. We also see heavy precipitation there along the just east of Boston there, to the Nantucket area, and into the eastern part of Maine, where heaviest precipitation is expected. Still some heavier precipitation into the northwest part of the country as well, and into the northern Rockies, but nothing particularly excessive for day 3. As we move ahead to days 4 and 5, we're expecting more heavy precipitation across a good part of California. Along the central and southern coast, they could see as much as 3 inches of rain into those areas, and in the Sierra Nevadas as much as 2 inches of snow water equivalent up into that area. And that could result into the higher elevations into some particularly heavy snow. Lighter precipitation amounts across the northern Mississippi Valley and into the northern High Plains and into the northern Rockies, as well as the upper Ohio Valley, where we're expecting up to a 1/4 inch of rainfall in all likelihood. And we could see up to an inch of precipitation into the northern part of Maine, into the northeastern part of the country. That's days 4 and 5. Moving ahead to days 6 and 7, from Sunday through Monday and then early Tuesday morning. Heavier precipitation expected into the Ohio Valley, where we could see as much as an inch of precipitation into the lower Ohio Valley, the lower part of the Ohio River, and into the Chicago-Milwaukee areas as well, where precipitation amounts could exceed 3/4 of an inch. Some badly needed precipitation expected in about a week up into that area. We also see some significant snow, in all likelihood, or rain expected into southern and central Rockies and into southwestern parts of California. How does this all add up over the next 7 days? Well, that graphic pretty much says it all. Significant amount of precipitation across the Great Lakes states and along the eastern seaboard from Maine all the way down into Florida. Those areas could get significant and perhaps flood-inducing rainfall into some of those areas. Not as much into parts of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and into the plain states of Kansas and Nebraska. Not good news for them because they've already got drought. They don't need another week of dry weather. But going back to our drought indication, they have drought right now, and so those areas getting another week of dry weather, not wanting it at all. New Mexico particularly quite dry, and they don't need this at all. They need some rainfall. Of course, it's not an area that is prone to getting a lot of rain anyway, but every little bit helps, and they're not even going to get that. Here it looks like over the next week. So the central and northern Rockies over the next week should get a fair amount of precipitation for the most part. And in particular, across California and along the West Coast, heavy precipitation expected into the Sierra Nevadas, along almost the entire coast. Well, it is the entire coast of California, on up to the west coast of Washington. So that's the next week. How about the extended outlook? And that would get past the drought outlook there. That would include first the 6 to 10 day outlook, getting out beyond the next 7 days. We're looking as far as temperatures to be generally below normal along the Canadian border, extending from Montana all the way over to Maine throughout the Great Lakes for the most part. Near normal, a ribbon of near normal is expected on temperatures from the 31st of March through the 4th of April. And that would extend from the mid-Atlantic states on over toward northern Illinois, southern Iowa, northern Missouri, and into Nebraska, northern Kansas, and into the central Rockies. An above normal area is expected across southeastern part of the country, especially the coastal areas of South Carolina and the coastal areas of southeastern Georgia. But really, the entire southeast should be above normal on temperature. Really above normal is expected south of the Ohio River and south of I-70. At least, as until you get to Colorado, and then things turn around a little bit. And we're expecting for the southwestern part of the country, especially Arizona and southern California and southern Nevada, southern Utah, below normal temperatures expected into that area, while it should be above normal for the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, parts of Idaho, and the entire state of Washington. Precipitation, this is hopeful. I for one, hope this pans out for the entire country. Places that are in drought would take near normal precipitation in a heartbeat, and we hope to get above that. The favored category for really the eastern, most of the country really, is expected, with the most likely area of above normal being in the upper Ohio Valley and across a good part of the southern Rockies and the southern half of the West Coast. The greatest likelihood of above normal precipitation in that 6 to 10 day outlook would be over Southern California into extreme southern Nevada, across southern Arizona. Those are desert areas, and so this is going to be a little bit unusual for them. Okay, moving on to week 2, the 8 to 14 day temperature outlook. I do not personally recall seeing this much of the country being near normal for week 2. This is unusual. The only above normal area indicated is down into the far southeastern part of the country, basically south of a line from Wilmington over to Atlanta, and then Birmingham, Alabama, and then southwestward to just east of Lake Charles there. That's in southern Florida, probably the best chance of seeing above normal temperatures for April 2nd through April 8th. Also above normal is indicated for far northern Maine, but the rest of the country near normal on temperatures, which isn't bad for that time of the year, April 2nd through the 8th. Below normal temperatures are expected, though, for the southwestern part of the country, basically New Mexico, southwestern Colorado, southern Utah, and southern Nevada, most of California, and all of Arizona. You also see near normal temperatures indicated for Alaska. I have to leave them out, and below normal temperatures for the state of Hawaii. All right, moving on to the precipitation outlook. This is also a nice a nice reflection for those of us in drought. Near normal precipitation. When you're in drought, you'll take near normal. A lot of times I'll see near normal on these outlooks, and it doesn't quite get there. We'll get some precipitation, but it won't quite be normal. Above normal is favored across the southeastern part of the country, and above normal is favored for much of the Rockies and into the southwest part of the country over that 8 to 14 day period. Near normal precipitation for the northwest United States. Above normal is also indicated for the entire states of Alaska and Hawaii. I should have mentioned this before I started the CPC outlooks, but what this is essentially is an indication of the favored category. And essentially you have four different categories in essence. You have above normal, you have near normal, and you have below normal on precipitation and temperature. And you have a category called equal chances, which means all of those three categories have the same 33 and a third % chance of actually taking place. If it's actually above that 33% threshold in any one category, that's the category that will be shown on these maps. So we move on to the monthly temperature outlook for the month of April. I'm going to pause here and take a quick look at what we have for chats. If we have any questions at this point. No questions. That's great. So I'll keep on keeping on. Monthly temperature outlook for the month of April. As you can see, the northern end of the United States is expecting above normal temperatures for the month. That's particularly true basically north of a line, if you will, from near Los Angeles to up to around Rapid City, South Dakota, southeastward to around Nashville, and then eastward to southeastern part of Virginia, Norfolk, I guess. And then above normal across southwestern Texas and the entire state, essentially, of New Mexico. Equal chances are the rule elsewhere for temperature. For precipitation, we're expecting below normal on monthly precipitation into the Great Lakes and in the Pacific Northwest, and where they've had drought, they don't need this, but below normal is expected for the month of April across southwest Texas and the state of New Mexico. The good news for the folks in drought is that above normal is anticipated across parts of the middle of the country, stretching from the southeast, where the most likely area of above normal precipitation is expected across coastal Carolina through southeast Georgia, northern Florida, southeast Alabama. That area of above normal, although not as far above normal, not as likely that we'll see above normal precipitation, but still that is the favored category across a good portion of Tennessee, Arkansas, into Missouri, and on up into Nebraska. And beyond that, into parts of southwestern South Dakota and northeastern Wyoming. And how about the seasonal outlook? This extends from April through June. Much of the country warms up. Basically, the takeaway here, we're looking at above normal temperatures being the likelihood across the eastern half of the country, essentially, at least. You could actually say the eastern 2/3, but there is that area of equal chances across the northern high plains and the eastern Rockies. Above normal down into the south central part of the country, especially around New Mexico and Texas, and above normal for the Pacific Northwest, but equal chances indicated for Southern California, Southern New Mexico, or Nevada, excuse me, southwestern Utah, and the entire state of Arizona. Equal chances. Also, the rule across, like I said, the Eastern Rockies and Northern High Plains. As far as precipitation, you still see that ribbon of above normal precipitation expected. That extends from the southeast northwestward across Arkansas, Tennessee, Missouri, northeastern Kansas, and a good part of the state of Nebraska. Again, a lot of those areas, as we saw, have been in drought. Now I'm going to take a couple of minutes here to look at this graphic. This is the 3-month likelihood of getting above a certain categorical threshold. And I'll explain that. In the National Weather Service, we essentially have 4 thresholds at every one of our flood forecast points. One is action stage, and that's basically a level getting close to flood stage, but not quite above it. Then you have flood stage for minor flooding, and that would be indicated by some of the orange squares there. Above that would be what we call moderate flooding, and that's when you start seeing more impactful flooding. Essentially, you start seeing county, possibly even some state roads that have to be closed as a result of high water. And then we get into the major flood category, and that's not indicated anywhere on this map, so we don't have to dwell on it too long. But what that would indicate is your worst flooding, record-setting flooding, of course, but flooding that would be impactful to homes and businesses, interstates, significant state highways, U.S. highways, of course. That would all be affected during major flooding. What I'm showing here is the area or the category that's most likely over the next 3 months. A quick word on how we develop these statistics. What we do is we take the initial conditions of stream flow, snowpack up north, soil moisture, and starting starting stream flow. And then we run those conditions through the model using the last 30 or so years of precipitation data at that point. And that gives us an array of answers, of course. You'll have dry years like parts of the country are having the last few years. And you'll have wet years where you had lots of flooding. All that is, every one of those individual years for the last 3 months will be fed through our models for every one of these points. And whatever is the most likely high category, the highest most likely category, is what is indicated on this map. So if it exceeds the 50% threshold, 50th percentile threshold, that's the color that would be indicated here. And in spite of the very wet conditions that were indicated in soil moisture and recent precipitation across the northeastern part of the country, most of that is indicated to be green, which is below flood stage. But as you get into the state of Maryland and down into Virginia, the Carolinas, you see more orange popping up, which is indicative of minor flooding being the likely category over the next 3 months. The same is true across a good part of northern Florida, much of Georgia, a good part of Alabama, and into Mississippi, and all the way into eastern Texas. Actually, across parts of eastern Texas, we have red indicated, which is the moderate flood stage being the most likely category. We also have that indicated down into, I think that's Mississippi, yeah, near the Mississippi-Louisiana border there, where we have moderate flooding likely. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's an above average risk. It is down there. It is down across the Gulf Coast and into the southeastern part of the country. That's all the result of El Nino. Um, we also see minor flooding likelihood in the Humboldt River Valley of northern Nevada in the Great Basin, and minor flooding a likelihood at a point in the southeastern Idaho. Um, but the point I'm trying to make is even though you may not see orange, that does not mean you have a below average risk of flooding. It's just the most likely category, being no flooding. If I get back into the middle of the country, you will notice a lot of orange and red dots across western Missouri. We always see that because that's where their thresholds are set. That's where those particular streams come out of their bank and start flooding. It doesn't take much rain, does not take a wet spring at all, doesn't even take a normal spring to produce minor or even moderate flooding at some of these rural gauges across west central Missouri into east central Kansas. We see some minor flooding in my neck of the woods around St. Louis as being the favorite category, but that too does not indicate an above average risk. It indicates a near normal or even a below average risk of flooding into those areas. And the same could be said across much of the state of Illinois. So to summarize, even though it shows green into the eastern and northeastern part of the country, much of that area has a near normal to actually an above normal risk of flooding because they've had a lot of precipitation over the last 3 months. The same is true across the southeastern and Gulf Coast states, where they've had a lot of precipitation thanks to El Nino. And those areas have an above average risk of precipitation there as well. The risk, though, is near to below normal across much of the middle and northern parts of the country, the north central parts of the country. The plain states are predominantly near to below normal. As you go into the west side of the Rockies, it flips over to near to above normal flood chances across much of those areas because they've had significant precipitation for the most part over the last 3 months and recently. They're still getting snow above 7,000 feet at many locations and expect to see that continue. All right. The last thing I'll show is this graphic, which is an example out of California of the Hydrologic Ensemble Forecast Service. And this is actually available nationwide. It is not an official forecast. It is not reviewed by river forecast centers before they send out the data. It is automated. But what it allows you to do is look at the forecast, which is actually indicated in this graphical in gray. And then look at what's coming up in terms of precipitation over the next 10 days. And with that precipitation in the model, it'll give you a range of probability based on the array of precipitation that the modeling is putting out from the ensemble service system that we're using to populate these graphs. So it hopefully gives users a head start beyond the official forecast that we put out for river forecasts, a head start as to how high the river might get in the 2 to 10 day period. Our official river forecasts use an array of forecast rainfall in the modeling, and it can vary from just 1 day of forecast rainfall in the summertime around my neck of the woods and in much of the central part of the country to up to 3 days over into the northeastern part of the country. And I'm not even sure how many days they use over the western end of the country, but it does vary. And it's stated on each website when you're looking at forecast graphs there. That is essentially all I have for the time being. I also have an a live demonstration of a new system that we're coming out with tomorrow, of all days. And I can show you that. But I'll stop here to see if there's any questions from those of us listening in. If you have questions, you can type them into the chat, or you can just take yourself off mute, and I'd love to hear them.
I'm anxious to hear about the new, whatever you were calling it, that's coming out tomorrow.
Yeah, that's the National Water Prediction Service, NWPS. We love acronyms.
Of course.
I work for the National Weather Service, but it's under NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as the National Organization of Annoying Acronyms. We never turned down a good-looking acronym.
True.
But anyway, that's what NWPS stands for, National Water Prediction Service. And it's taking the place of the Advanced Hydrologic Prediction Service, which will still be available for the next couple of months for people who might have a hard time switching over to the new service. But I think people will find the new service very intuitive. And I have it up, so let me get out of here and give you a quick, I don't see any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and show you what I can. Can you see that, Connie?
Yes, we can.
Good. All right. This is how the page will open up. Actually, it will also show by default points that are not in flood, and that will look like that. But to me, that gets kind of busy. So I prefer to usually take off those points just to make the map look a little cleaner, and leave us with those points that are expected over the next near-term forecast period to get to action stage or higher. And there's a few reds there across eastern Virginia and parts of Maryland, the results of some recent significant rainfall they've had into those areas. As I scroll down here on the right-hand side, we can look at stuff from the National Water Model, flood inundation. That's going to be available throughout the country eventually. Right now, it's just 10% of the country that has it. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on flood inundation products today, but that will be coming for 30% of the country this fall, actually September, and it then will expand the following year to 60% of the country, and then to 100% of the country. That's the goal for 2 years from now. So I think September of 2026 will be the target date to see flood inundation mapping through. You'll be able to see it through this new service for everybody. What I want to show here is kind of a handy thing, giving us precipitation estimates over the last 24 hours. But you don't have to look at just 24 hours. You have options to see it. Actually, it defaults to the wrong day. Let me change the date here. And see, we'll take a look at today because I'd rather see today. And it shows all that nice precipitation that fell across the middle of the country over the last 24 hours, especially across our neck of the woods county and on up into northern Illinois. They had up to and better than, I think that's yellow's 2 inches, 1.5 to 2 inches is what the yellow indicates. So, and also a fair amount of that across the south central part of the lower Mississippi Valley. But you can also take a look, I think it'll show up here, just the last hour, the last 6 hours, 12 hours, 24. You'll have options to see precipitation output. And let me see if I get a useful value here for the past 90 days. Takes a little while. But yeah, past 90 days shows you all the rain they've had across the coastal areas of northern California, all of Oregon and Washington there, and areas across the eastern part of the country that have had substantial rainfall, especially from eastern Texas on into upstate South Carolina. Better than 20 inches were indicated during this past winter. And I showed a similar graphic earlier, but and I didn't get it from this site, but I could have. So some nice options there. Now let me show you some other advantages this has. If you zoom into, let me put the no flood back on there. Now give me St. Louis. When I click on St. Louis, I'll get a hydrograph. Ignore the back end of that. So the issue we're working on. And that's the near-term forecast for the Mississippi River at St. Louis. And the old hydrographs that we had showed you something that you, the user, could not affect. What you can do, though, is alter what you're actually seeing. You can change the default. You can look at data going back over the past 14 plus or minus 7 days, plus or minus 3.5 days, plus or minus 2 days. I'm sorry, plus or minus 1 day in this case, or plus or minus 12 hours. Or you can show all of it. Well, in that part of it, that's in upper data, but let me show you this. I can go all the way back to 1 month prior to the current day, and that can be handy if you're interested in what's been going on beyond the last 7 or 10 days, which is really all you had available to you in AHAPS. As I scroll down, we see a lot of the same things we had with the old AHAPS system, the categorical levels, major, moderate, and minor, what the different colors represent, observed forecast, and record levels, some of the gauge info. But if you wanted to see more, just click on full information here, and you'll get a full-blown version of this site, along with the same handlebars. It doesn't want to work now. There we go. It was a little slow to respond to me here. I'm sorry. Yes, Connie?
Yeah, so I guess this is going to help with forecasting or warnings, that kind of stuff, coming out of at least the St. Louis area, because that's where you're at, in the area
Right.
with the state.
This is for the country.
Mm-hmm.
This is not just for St. Louis. This is for the entire country coming out tomorrow. And it really doesn't affect forecasting from our perspective. Mm-hmm. It affects what we can show, because one thing I didn't show you here is National Water Model Guidance. So it'll not only show, it doesn't show the official forecast actually, but it does show the National Water Model Guidance and how high that might get. Mm-hmm. And that can come in handy. And it also as I scroll down, this is what I wanted to show you. You'll be able to see flood inundation maps through this map, which I find very, very useful and intriguing. It's probably not the best example here, but it does show you where the river might go if it gets out of bank there. Um, First gauge photos that was available with the old system, um, and the rest of this is what we used to have with AHAPS. But uh, it does give you it gives you the user more capability to see a variety of different things. Um, and I think it's an exciting step forward for us anyway.
Good. Well, I was going to say, I look forward to, well, I always look forward to hearing, what you have to say. Anybody in National Weather Service, especially you out of St. Louis, because you always do such a great job for us in even the entire state of Missouri, not just those that you cover, your office covers in Missouri, but you cover the whole state for us, and we, appreciate it. And I appreciate you doing this for the entire nation because it's not your responsibility, but you took it on, and I appreciate it a lot. Does anybody have any other questions that they would like to ask Mark? I hope this was helpful to you, kind of get a better idea about what we're looking forward to or not forward to in the next few months. But it doesn't appear to be anything, real major. We've had some years that have been awful
Yeah,
for us, that you probably could have said, okay, yeah, hang on to your hats because, this is really going to take off here. So anyway,
that was last year.
yeah, I was going to say there's been several years, hasn't there?
Yeah,
Um,
last year there was a bunch of snow up in Minnesota and Wisconsin,
mhm,
and it was well above average. There's usually is snow up there. What's so unusual about this winter for the middle of the country is the fact that there's no snow, or virtually no snow. Before this blizzard yesterday,
mhm.
there was no snow in Minnesota or Wisconsin
Oh, wow.
or the northern Dakotas. We never see that in late March. Um, First time I've ever seen it in my 17 years here at this office. So it was quite a surprise to see that, and just because they got some significant snow yesterday, uh, really doesn't change the outlook. It's we're in a drought. It's going to take a ton of water to even approach flood stage in the Mississippi. Not to say that it can't happen. Certainly it could, uh, but it would take repetitive rainfall um,
Mhm.
over a fair amount of time to even get within sniffing distance of a flood stage. And that's true for a lot of places around the middle of the country that are dealing with drought right now.
Mhm.
It's a natural consequence of drought. Um, we do worry though about the quick change over to a wet pattern because that can moisten up the ground in a hurry and create some quick runoff um, after a while. So that's especially true of some of the smaller streams around us and really anywhere. Um, uh, Very quick and heavy rainfall can produce flash flooding, even on some good sized streams. So um, something that we're always aware of, and I've seen it before, where we'd be dry, and all of a sudden, boom, we no
Mhm.
sense of normalcy. We just go straight into a very normal or abnormal wet pattern from abnormal dryness, and something to keep an eye out for. But based on historical data that I showed, I don't. Most of the country doesn't have much to worry about except the places I highlighted down in the southeast part of the country, the Gulf Coast. Um, uh, Maybe parts of California, in some of the intermountain regions, but primarily it should be a flood-free year based on historical data for the past 30 to more years, sometimes as much as 50 or 60 years of data in our modeling.
Well, I was going to say that it's good to know, at least for those of us who are not in those areas, that we will not be maybe experiencing any flooding, but the drought just, and we can go into a drought so quickly, we can come out and go in. It just is amazing to me. So anyway,
Yeah.
Mark, again, thank you for your time, and everyone else who was on the call. Again, it's recorded. We'll send it out to make sure that others get this information, because I think it's important that we look at this holistically, you know, across the country, not just in the parts of it that we live, you know, because it all kind of works together, and we all need to work together on these issues that come up with this. So anyway, okay, well, we'll call it an end to this webinar. And thank you again, Mark, for all the work you put into it. I appreciate it a lot.
My pleasure, Connie. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Bye.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.